In June 2026, one company sold shares to the public and raised $75 billion in a single day. That's not just a big number. That's the largest IPO in the entire history of the stock market. Not a bank, not a car company, not some tech giant that's been around for decades, slowly building its name. It was SpaceX, a rocket company. And when the dust settled, it was worth $1.77 trillion. Now, here's the part that's going to mess with your head, because there's a story everyone assumes about why this happened, and that story is wrong. If you think SpaceX went public to pay off debt, you're mistaken. If you think the founder just wanted to cash out, you're missing the entire point. That's not what this was about. The money is actually for three things that sound like they belong in a science fiction movie. The first, data centers for artificial intelligence floating in orbit above the Earth. The second, a rocket that launches once every single hour, around the clock, like a bus schedule. And the third, a factory on the surface of the moon. Three things. And I haven't even told you the weirdest part yet. Here's the question that nobody seems to be asking out loud. If SpaceX is already profitable, and if it could raise money from private investors anytime it wanted, and it could, then why sell the company to the public at all? Why give up control? Why open the books? Why take on the scrutiny of the entire world? And why now? Why did this happen in June of 2026 and not 5 years earlier or 5 years later? Stick with me, because the answer is stranger than the IPO itself. Let's start with what everyone assumes, because it's the same assumption we all learned growing up. When a company goes public, it's almost always for one of three reasons. Maybe they're drowning in debt and the only way out is to sell shares. Maybe they need a huge pile of cash to expand, and private money isn't enough. Or maybe the founder just wants to get rich and walk away into the sunset. That's the pattern. It's a pattern we've seen 1,000 times. And if you apply that pattern to SpaceX, you'd assume they were desperate for money, that they had no choice. But here's the thing. That assumption falls apart the second you actually look at the numbers. SpaceX does not need your money. In the second quarter of 2026, they brought in $7.8 billion in revenue. That's up 92% from the year before, nearly double in a single year. And the engine behind all that cash is Starlink, their satellite internet business. Right now, Starlink has around 12 million subscribers spread across 159 countries. Each of those subscribers pays roughly $66 a month on average. Do the math and you start to see it. This is a machine that prints cash every single month reliably, like clockwork. So they're not broke. They're the opposite of broke. And here's the detail that really kills the desperate for money theory. Every single time SpaceX wanted to raise money before the IPO, private investors lined up around the block. They weren't begging for checks. They were turning investors away. Their valuation was already measured in the trillions from private deals alone, long before they ever touched the public market. So if money isn't the problem, then what is? That's the question that matters. It's the question almost nobody asks. And the answer to that question is the entire reason this video exists. Here's where you have to start thinking differently, because there's a massive gap between two things that sound similar but aren't the same at all. There's a difference between needing money and needing money at this scale, this fast, with this much risk attached. Most companies need the first kind of money, a few million, maybe a few hundred million, to grow. SpaceX needs the second kind. And that's a completely different problem to solve, because what SpaceX wants to build next isn't a company. It isn't even a product. It's an entire industrial system, and it requires a kind of funding that private investors simply cannot or will not provide. Let me show you what I mean. Here's the vision Elon keeps repeating, and it sounds insane until you actually sit with it for a minute. Starship, their giant fully reusable rocket, isn't meant to launch once a month the way normal rockets do. The goal is a launch every single hour, 200 tons of cargo per flight, millions of tons sent to orbit every single year. Read that again, millions of tons every year. That's not a space program. That's a logistics network the size of a small country. It's a shipping operation that runs around the clock, never stops, never slows down. And building a fleet of hundreds of rockets, flying them constantly, reusing them constantly, that costs more money than any single investor on the planet is willing to hand over. But the numbers get even more revealing when you look at what this actually means for the cost of getting to space. Here's the history. Back in the space shuttle era, sending 1 kilogram into orbit cost roughly $54,000. That's 1 kilogram, about the weight of a bag of flour. $54,000. Then SpaceX came along with the Falcon 9, and by reusing the rocket instead of throwing it away, they crashed that price down to about $3,000 per kilogram. That alone was a revolution. It changed the entire economics of space. But SpaceX isn't done. The target for Starship is around $100 per kilogram. Let that land. From $54,000 $1,000 per kilogram all the way down to 100. That's the difference between paying for a luxury car and paying for a bag of groceries. Same kilogram. Completely different world. That's the kind of transformation SpaceX is chasing. And here's the catch. The thing that connects all of this back to the IPO. To get costs down that far, you can't fly occasionally. You have to fly constantly, a launch every hour. And to fly every hour, you need hundreds of rockets. Not one or two. You need factories running around the clock, churning out engines and ships and the entire fleet. Think of it this way. A normal startup can scale with a laptop and a server room. SpaceX is trying to build a factory the size of a city and run it with the precision of a Swiss watch. When you need that much capital, that fast, there's only one place on Earth big enough to hold it, the public stock market. That's why $75 billion. That's why the biggest IPO in history. Not because they're weak, because the ambition is too big for any private investor to carry alone. So now we know why the money had to come from the public. But what exactly is all that money actually buying? What are these three things I teased at the start? The first answer is the strangest one. Data centers for artificial intelligence floating in orbit. To understand why this makes sense, you have to understand what artificial intelligence is hungry for. And AI is hungry for three things in enormous, almost absurd amounts. Electricity to run the computers. Cooling, because those computers run so hot they'd melt without it. And data. Moving constantly, around the clock, without pause. Those three things are the lifeblood of every AI model in the world. And here's the problem. Earth is running out of the first one. In 2026, data centers around the world are consuming something like a 500 terawatt hours of electricity. A 500 terawatt hours is enough to power roughly a 50 million homes for an entire year. And it's growing fast. So fast, in fact, that analysts are warning that a shortage of electricity could hold back up to 40% of new AI data centers by 2027. Think about what that means. It's not the chips that are the bottleneck anymore. It's not the engineers. It's literally the power grid. There just isn't enough cheap electricity on the ground to keep building these things at the pace AI is demanding. And now, look up. In space, you get two of the three things AI needs for free. First, sunlight. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no clouds, no night, no seasons. Unlimited solar energy all the time. Second, the cold. Space is naturally freezing, and that matters more than you'd think because cooling is one of the most expensive parts of running a data center on Earth. Down here, you have to spend enormous amounts of money and energy just to stop the computers from overheating. Up there, the cold is already built in. It costs almost nothing. So you've got free power and free cooling. And here's the kicker, SpaceX already owns the orbital infrastructure. Starlink is already up there, thousands of satellites, moving data around the entire planet right now. They've already solved the hardest part of building anything in space. So a data center in orbit isn't science fiction to SpaceX. It's not some far-off dream, it's the next logical step. But here's the catch, and it's the bridge to everything else. To build a data center in space, you have to get heavy equipment off the ground cheaply and constantly. You can't do that with occasional launches, and that's exactly where Starship comes in. Here's where the whole story finally clicks together. Because when it comes to space, one number decides everything: the cost per launch. That single number is the difference between a wild idea and a real business. The cheaper each launch is, the more you can send up, and the more of these absurd-sounding plans suddenly start making money. And right now, getting to space is brutally, almost comically expensive. Here's why. The way rockets have always worked is this. You build one, you use it once, and then you throw it away. The most expensive machine humans have ever built, and you throw it in the ocean after a single use. It's like buying a brand new airplane for every single flight. Imagine if that's how airlines worked. A ticket to the next city would cost millions. That's why the space shuttle cost $54,000 per kilogram. Not because the fuel was expensive, but because the entire machine was garbage after one trip. Starship changes all of that. Starship is fully reusable. It launches, it lands, it gets refueled, and it flies again and again and again. When a rocket flies again and again, the cost per launch collapses. And this isn't a theory. SpaceX has already proven it with the Falcon 9, taking the price from $54,000 per kilogram down to $3,000. That happened. It's real. Starship just takes the same idea and pushes it to the extreme. Around $100 per kilogram. That's the entire game. Fly more, pay less per flight, and suddenly the impossible becomes affordable. Suddenly a data center in orbit isn't a dream. It's a spreadsheet that works. But here's the catch, and this is where the IPO comes back into the picture. To get that cost down, you can't just launch when you feel like it. You have to fly constantly, a launch every hour. And to fly every hour, you need hundreds of rockets, all working, all reusable, all in rotation. You need factories running day and night, building engines, building ships, building the entire fleet at a pace no space program has ever attempted. That kind of production line can't be funded by Starlink's cash flow alone. It's too big. It needs the full weight of $75 billion of public money, all pointed at one single goal: make space cheap. Because once space is cheap, every other piece of this story falls into place on its own. So that's two of the three things: AI data centers in orbit and the rocket fleet to build them. But there's a third piece, and it's the one that ties the entire story together and makes sense of everything you've just heard: the moon. Now, I want to be clear about what I mean here, because this is where most people get it wrong. This isn't the moon as a tourist destination. It isn't flags and footprints and astronauts posing for photos. That's the old version of the moon, the version from 50 years ago. The new version is the moon as a factory. Elon's plan is to build AI compute satellites at a massive scale on the lunar surface. And the reason that matters is simple. This is something that's basically impossible to sustain with Earth-based manufacturing. Building these things on the moon isn't a stunt. It's the only way to make the next stage of the plan work at all. And here's the thing about the moon. It's not the end goal. It was never the end goal. The moon is the launch pad. The moon is the practice run, the proving ground, the stepping stone to the real target, the place this whole enormous machine has been pointed at from the very beginning: Mars. And SpaceX isn't waiting around for this to happen someday. It's already moving. The plan is a launch to the moon every 10 days. 2 days to get there. That's not a decade away. That's a schedule. That's infrastructure being built right now in real time. So now, let me give you the twist, because it's the moment this entire video has been building toward, and it flips everything you've ever been told about what an IPO means. Your whole life, you've been taught that a company goes public because it's in trouble, because it needs saving, because it's too weak to survive on its own. We've all absorbed that story without ever questioning it. SpaceX just broke that rule in the most spectacular way possible. They didn't go public because they were desperate. They went public because their ambition finally got too big for private investors to handle. The IPO wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign that the vision outgrew the room it was standing in. So why now? That's the question from the very beginning of this video. And now you can answer it yourself, because Starship just reached the point where all of this became possible. And the money to make it real only exists in one place: the public markets. That's the whole story. Not debt, not cashing out. Just a bet so enormous that the entire world had to buy in. And here's the thing. This is only the beginning. The story doesn't end with an IPO. It starts there. Every video here starts the same way, with a question that doesn't make sense until you see the full picture. Why would a company that's already rich sell itself to the public? Why does a rocket company need a factory on the moon? And by the end, that question always turns into an answer that changes how you look at the world. If you're the kind of person who can't let a question like that go unanswered, then you already belong here. Subscribe, and let's chase the next one together.